old commercial about Reese's Cups. They're typically one of the top sales in candy year in and year out over the past several years, and have been around for decades, over $1 billion worth of sales. And the typical way that these old commercials would go would be a person would be walking around the corner with their, on their headphones or things like that, holding a piece of chocolate. Another person would have a peanut butter jar in their hand, and they would come around the corner being distracted, bump into each other, and you'd hear them say, "You got peanut butter on my chocolate. You got chocolate in my peanut butter." And then they would take a bite of it and be so surprised at how great it tastes. So since Lisa, since you're not on mute, I'm going to ask you, what kinds of things do you associate with chocolate?
I love to eat chocolate when I just need to have some good comfort food, and I find it really soothing. And I just like it plain. I like it with, mixed with peanut butter. I like it with almonds. I like it anyway.
So normally when we do this talk, we're actually, in a very interactive format. So we're actually asking the audience questions, and you hear all those kinds of things: comfort, silky, smooth, sweet. And then what about peanut butter?
Well, I love peanut butter. It's sticky in my mouth, and salty and creamy or crunchy. It really is the comfort food from my childhood. Peanut butter.
And I'm sure there's a lot of us working on our groceries and things like that, where peanut butter is a big staple over these next few weeks and these tough times of getting through. But when we're usually doing the talk, you see that you have these two materials with very different characteristics. But when you put them together, you get a really synergy of a great taste that's extremely popular, a flavor. Whether it's in ice cream or candy, that chocolate and peanut butter, I just love the way the crinkles taste when you get to taste them. And in a similar note, we really think that this is a way, and I'd like to relate to you how we feel like that you can harness that same kind of thinking to harness power in the use of recovery services and crisis services that we do. So today we'd like to talk a little bit about that. We call it the fusion model, as well as how important peer support and its role in that plays in this effort. So I'm Chuck Browning. I'm the Chief Medical Officer at RI International, which used to be called Recovery Innovations. And I always want to clarify, we're not Recovery International, we're RI International, because I don't want to confuse with our names with them, and make sure that they have that separate title. So we're RI International, Recovery Innovations, and we're known for several things. I'm going to let Lisa tell you a little bit about the history of the company.
So I just have to start by prefacing that Chuck is the most recovery-focused psychiatrist you will ever meet, and he's just a joy to work with. And when RI first started, we were a typical behavioral health company providing overnight stays for people who were experiencing challenging feelings and symptoms and different things. And in 2000, we decided to bring peer supporters on our team. And since that time, we've worked with about half to 2/3 of our team at any given time are peer supporters. And with 1,500 people in our company right now, that's a lot of peer supporters. And they work from in-home services to housing services to crisis services to educational services to career services with people. I mean, they're really side by side engaged with a program that we have in the entire company, including our crisis centers, where we have a very excellent and wonderful multidisciplinary team in multiple states that works together with people in their worst moment to help them through that in the most powerfully recovery-focused way that we can. And one of the things that gives that gift to people is having peer support in those environments to work with them. Hope.
Thanks, Lisa. And so with our work in the crisis world, we've become, thought leaders in a lot of the principles of how to do that. And so I get to go around and have the fortune of being able to talk about crisis services and consult with different states that are interested in learning about how we do things, and get to see all kinds of different ways that crisis response centers and things are set up and done throughout the country. And so I hope to use that experience to kind of help paint a picture as we go forward about where we are with what we've been working on and related to this fusion model and related to this crisis care. But in order to be able to talk about that, you kind of have to go back to understand where crisis has been. So I'm going to tell a little bit of story about that ties into, it actually is a personal story of probably about 2 years ago. A friend of mine, I'm going to call him Scott, I got a call from his wife that she was coming back early from a trip with a girls' beach trip, and she was just in tears, and called me because she knew I was in the mental health field, and her husband was really having a trouble, had never had this happen before, had some depression before, but he was having really strong suicidal thoughts, and did to the point that they were really fearful that he was having, stronger intent about things that he wanted to do. And luckily, by them knowing me and having a call, we were able to kind of set up some immediate outpatient support that day and make sure that he was in a safe setting, and met with a really good fella who was able to work through some of the things that were going on. They were able to initially figure out some things that were really triggering symptoms and things that were making the suicidal presence of those thoughts even stronger. And he was able to get some immediate help that was collaborative, and the person who worked with him and worked with the family. And it was a really great outcome. And he's talked about even now how much difference that made, that they were able to get in and see somebody. And as you know, across our country, that's just not the usual experience when folks are having a bad day. So if my friend Scott had had a heart attack or had been in a car wreck, there would have been definite standards of being able to call a number, 911, to get help. If it could be resolved at home with 911, it would be. And if it needed another level of care, then there would be a response team to be able to come out that would be trained with standard practices of how to manage that, and would have helped Scott get to figure out whether that's something that he would have could have been dealt with at home, and they could have done some things there. Or if he needed another level of care, then they could have taken him to the emergency department, where when he arrived there, it wouldn't matter what his money situation was, insurance situation was. When you go to the emergency department, you're going to get access to care, and you're going to be dealt with standards of care that make sense, that have evidence-based practices behind them. Now, I'm not saying that every emergency department is perfect with their medical things, but there is kind of an overall expectation that no matter where you are, rural or urban, you're going to get access to care when you have certain medical things that happen. And yet in our country, throughout our country, really struggle with being able to provide that for people when they're having a tough day with mental health or substance use concerns. And so we have seen that evolving, and one of the things that we talk a lot about at RI is this, that we've been in support of developing, is this concept called Crisis Now, which basically just drives on those three things, that there should be mental health parity, and we should have in communities both a crisis call line that can help center and direct and be a navigator and have open access to everyone that they can call. And luckily, I don't know if you guys have all heard, but we're very close over the next year or two to developing a 911 for mental health and substance use called 988. It's being supported with bipartisan legislation, and we're moving towards that. And the second step of Crisis Now is actually having outreach and being able to go out with specialty supports in communities to help people resolve their needs there, if at all possible. And then only then, if someone needed another level of care, then having the third piece of Crisis Now's foundation is having separate freestanding units, different from taking people to a jail or taking people to an emergency department where they may wait for 4 or 5 days trying to get into a hospital, because that also can be a really challenging situation, because a lot of times emergency departments don't have specialty in mental health support, and because of liability, they there's like an offer on switch. You either are allowed to go home, or they're going to petition you for involuntary commitment and try to send you to a hospital and because of that, there becomes backlogs in the emergency departments. So all of the Crisis Now principle is all about fixing that and creating people to fit the level of clinical care for where they need. And so as we've been out talking about and seeing that, I get to see different ways that that's happening. And now we're going to, just like we talked about the Reese's Cup, I'd like to ask Lisa and the audience, if you want to share on chat, we see two kinds of models typically when we're consulting and doing this. One is like this biomedical hospital model of running a crisis center. And the other is you see lots of different variations of what I would call recovery-oriented care or recovery-focused centers. So when you think of biomedical model, Lisa, what things come to mind?
When I think about a biomedical, me as an entire person, as all of the interests that would be necessary for me to have good health, including discussion, and some of the mental health, some of them are the physical health needs, and some of them are the psychological needs of people. And when we leave any one of those aspects of our care out, can take the rest of us down with it. For far too long, I think we've met people who are with often or even emergency rooms of hospitals where they really don't know how to most effectively help people. So we're talking about specialized care where they get what they need and care of them, and the environment is warm and has peer support and has doctors that get it, and nurses who are committed to serving us, because I'm who uses those services.
Yeah, Lisa, I'm going to read some of the comments. When I'm hearing your voice, Lisa, it's kind of bouncing in and out. If my sound is cutting in and out, please let me know too. But I could hear most of what you said. Melissa Frass wrote, have worked in both the biomedical, she associates it with herding people through, containing people, seeing a doctor and discharging. That's a really common one that I hear. Jonathan, judgment, labeling, punitive approaches, using the word non-compliance as opposed to choice. And so medication, Libby said, in a recovery model, what kinds of things do y'all associate? Chat in for that. What are things that you associate with a recovery model? And Lisa talked about warm and connected. Trauma-informed. Choice, hope, positive regard, meeting someone where they are, respect, supported decision-making and choice, connecting, dignity. They choose their own goals. So these are really great answers, and it reminds me of the things that we hear when we're out presenting. So I'm going to show you real quickly. So when you look at sometimes with an example of a biomedical model, there can be some strengths to it. When we talked about emergency room having special metrics and metrics and data that they collect to be able to do quality improvement projects. One of the things in the Arizona system is that they have saved just hundreds of millions of dollars. I think in 1 year in 2017 through that input, they are about as close as any state in the country to having those crisis now elements. They saved 45 years of waiting in emergency room time just in that 1 year by the amount of time that was taken out of emergency room boarded by having those different levels of clinical care. And they do that through basically saying that if you run a crisis center in Arizona, you cannot say no. If mobile support or law enforcement or somebody comes by to drop someone off, you cannot send them over to the emergency room if they're too difficult or if they're having certain substance use issues along with it. It's something that you have to manage, and it's mandated if you're going to serve that. So so that's, some of the benefits of that is that it created a system that really gave access to everyone. There also have been pioneers sometimes in developing quality initiatives and taking industry-related quality improvement things for efficiencies or for minimizing the chance of making errors and adding those in. But like a lot of you said, sometimes that's not necessarily always done in a recovery-ready way. In some hospital models of crisis, you'll see plexiglass with the staff behind plexiglass. You'll see people lined up in chairs, not really doing much. It was kind of like big bouncer guys sitting out on the floor, and maybe not necessarily where you would want your family to be. Lisa, could you would you mind on this next slide? We apologize of sharing. This has been a talk, and we, with all of the COVID response, we have not had a chance to do as much coordination as I would like to have, and so we're basically half and halving this. So I'm going to shut up as we get through the next part of this and let Lisa take over talking about a big part of it. That's why it seems like it's a little segmented right now. So I apologize because we have not had as much prep time. We've been doing conference calls 24/7 for the past 14 days. Let's see if I can make this slide work.
So
Lisa, these are some of the things I think.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Oh no, I was letting you talk a little bit about some of the innovations that the recovery world has done.
Yeah. So RI International has had recovery pathways for a long time, and those are hope, choice, empowerment, a recovery culture for people and so we bring those things into our setting, and in addition to those things, create like the best environment, fertile ground for recovery. We bring in clinical expertise so that you're getting the kind of great care when you need it that you would get in a really good hospital if you're having appendicitis or something. And so putting those things together around the person ensures they have the best opportunity to access the things that will help them, that they decide that will work them, and with a team care and can offer those things like this, create hope in them, remind them that this is a day in their life and it doesn't mean it's how things will be forever. And the use of peer support in our environments is so important, because when you have peer support present, it just changes the feeling and the flavor of the entire team. And their presence helps that team, that clinical team, remember that people get better. And sometimes in environments, like hospitals where there aren't peer support working, staff can forget that people recover and that the way that they see people, how they are 24/7, 365 days a year, that was a moment in time. And so they can get kind of cynical, but when you have peer support there beside you, you're always reminded that this is a moment in a person's life, and just like the that works beside you as a peer support, will get better. And our job in that environment is to empower them to believe, understand, think, and change for them. And I don't know that message is given front and in every kind of setting that a person can go to get care for their emotional and mental health. And we use what's called a living room of our recovery response centers, and we call it a living room because that is a place where we get better. When we have a cold or something, we lay on the couch in our room. And so we wanted our environment, that recovery environment, to be very positive and comforting. And so every way that we can, we try to make sure that the environment is warm and welcoming. The other thing is that we have a no first practice, and that means we work very hard to never lay hands on people. The only time that we would engage in hands-on practice with anything would be if someone was really a very big danger to themselves or to the people who are in the crisis center with them. So we meet every month, and we work on how can we do better so that we never have to lose anyone. Thanks, Chuck.
So thanks, Lisa. So I don't think it would, I think if we took a vote, and I've never done this presentation anywhere where I asked which of the two would you rather be, that people don't say, please let me go to the recovery-oriented focus place. But there is a litmus test that I want to talk about, is that, you know, if you're the parent or a brother or a significant other of someone, and let's give this litmus test of what happens to different crisis centers. 250-pound guy, intoxicated with crystal methamphetamine, really, really aggressive because they're not in touch with reality at the moment, and, you know, think that people are trying to hurt them, and their brain is very much affected at that, just in that acute moment about things. And they may be the sweetest person in the world normally, but they're, you know, maybe trying to bite the skin off of their arm, or just randomly punching people beside them, or trying to run in front of a police car, and they're just not thinking logically like they would be normally. In situations like that, a lot of places that are recovery oriented might not have the structure or the ability to keep that person safe in the moment, or they may just say, you know, a lot of crisis places, both hospital model and recovery model will say, you know, we can't manage that. That's too high acuity. Or, you know, this person has these medical concerns. We need to send them to their emergency room to get medical clearance. And so you end up sending everybody through, and you still have that same chokehold problem of people not being able to get access to there. So there is a litmus test. And so what you end up seeing in most of the country is you can have a place that you really think is a great place and has recovery-oriented place, but you might not be able to get through. You might not get access. And that's really important in a crisis system for people to be able to get access. But then sometimes the places that are no wrong door and take everyone and have what we talked about with like the bouncers and a lot of seclusion restraints and things like that, it can be an environment where you would not want anybody in your family to go, except for maybe your mother-in-law. So that's one of the things when we talk about this that we're talking about is, why can't we have both? Why can't we have a place that would have access and a place that you would want your loved one to go? And so we use those two things to talk about that. So the fusion model really talks about being able to blend those two things together, but it also talks a little bit about what Lisa was mentioning before, is this ability to use both talents of maybe that's some of the things and strengths of the biomedical world, just like we talked about the chocolate and the peanut butter, along with the recovery world. And the truth is, it's not that easy to do. So we talk about that we love the use of fusion. The actual scientific definition of it is, unlike fission, which is the splitting of atoms that creates like an atomic or nuclear explosion, fusion is bringing them together, and it creates the power of a sun, of a star. But yet it takes unbelievable amount of heat and pressure to make that work. And we have scientists that have spent millions of dollars in international projects together to work towards trying to create fusion on Earth without success at this point. And likewise, sometimes in my experience, going to different psychiatric conferences versus recovery conferences, there can be a lot of tension in bringing those two worlds together. Lisa and I are very fortunate to work in a place where it's not that level of tension, but you still see it sometimes. When I bring in a new provider, or we bring in a new nurse, and they've never worked in a recovery-oriented space before, like let's say they've been in a psychiatric hospital and their training is that way. I mean, my training was very much about making it a diagnosis, getting the symptoms, you know, figuring out that through the diagnosis, what are the recommended evidence-based practice treatments, and then, you know, being nice and working with the person, but it wasn't recovery-oriented training that I got in medical school. And you learn in the hospital system of the pressures of billing and things like that to, you know, do and run a process. And you can quickly all of a sudden go from what we talked about just before of not doing stuff with people, but doing things to people. And so when people come and providers come and they have not used to working with peers, it can get a lot of questions like, you know, what's this person's lifestyle? I'm not sure how are they gonna be able to handle and support clinical things on the floor with these folks that have high acuity or these really challenging symptoms. I'm not so sure about it. And it's even worse if it's a new site that we're opening where everybody's kind of new together and trying to figure that out. It always works really well when they come into a setting that we already are running and everybody on the team is fused together on how to do that work together and share what we do as a team. and likewise, you can see a lot of tension in the recovery world sometimes about the biomedical models and things. I have been in conferences where people would like to burn it down and start over and those kinds of things. So you have that tension that's there. So Lisa, would you like to talk a little bit about this whole fulcrum and leverage of what led to our project and kind of explain the project of the fusion model that we've worked on over the past year? Or actually past several years?
So yes, I would. When we first up a recovery response center to peer supporters, we went a really bumpy time. And it was very difficult for staff to even come to a place where they could see that the people who had been individuals they had served going to come work beside them. I mean, it's really hard for them to understand. But slowly but surely we did that, and we embedded peers into the crisis center, which a lot of people disagreed with, and but we think that peers should be people in their worst moment, and that they should be available to them to inspire hope. And then through the years, we started the living room, and that's a peer nurse. And our doctors and nurses are next door, but it's run by the peer supporters themselves. But they're all in the part of the recovery response center that's locked. That's the 72-hour hold or the 23-hour observation that is the gatekeeper for the hospital. And so we're trying to do everything in that place to try to help people have a short stay in our living room, or not have to go to the hospital. Every time together to make it happen in that very fast-paced setting. But we got to a point where we were deciding who we wanted to take and who we didn't take. And that isn't a way to be. So in 2015, we went back to a place where we were taking everyone, and one of the most important groups that we need to take people from is the police. Because if we don't take people who are really, really struggling or high drugs or fail. And so we don't want that to happen. So we want to open our doors and make that no wrong door kind of belief a reality, that when people come to us, they're welcome, and we work with them no matter who they are, no matter what their circumstance is, because we want them to have the opportunity they would get if they come and work with us, which could really profoundly change their life. And we get enough letters from people telling us that it did, that good is happening there. We looked at, we had to have an electronic medical record, and when we took one on board, we saw, it needed to have tweaks and adjustments, and we're continuing to do that to make it as recovery focused as possible. And we also have people who are in our clinics who are milieu specialists who know how to keep things calm, who might just start doing a yoga or a Tai Chi in the middle of the room when anxiety starts to rise or something, and it's kind of a beautiful thing to see. So I don't know, what else would you like to say about it, Doctor?
Oh, well, Lisa, the whole premise of the pendulum was that I would say we would have been very, very recovery focused in the early 2000s. And as we, especially in Arizona, as we, worked on being able to build in the infrastructure to survive as a crisis center with the billing requirements and having to have an electronic medical record, when we went from Recovery Journey to Avatar, we lost a lot of the, that was a great tool that helped support choice and partnering and collaboration that we lost. But we had to have that to be able to survive and do the correct kinds of billing and internet health exchange and things like that. Likewise, being no wrong door, our pendulum swung too much to where we became way too much of doing things to people, even though we had that recovery focus and as part of our mission. I felt, and we've talked about this, that we probably became too medically focused and too provider and heavy. And so having that realization and working on where can we, we've got to find So this is a graph showing you in the Arizona site, right outside of Phoenix and Peoria, over the past few years, our numbers have continued to climb, and over 82% of people are brought either voluntary or involuntary from police drop-offs and mobile support in the community. So it's a really high acuity population. And so you're talking thousands, and just in that group of years, 20,000 people where we never said no. But in doing that and being able to manage and support those people and keep them safe, it is easy to lose your way. And so part of the thing that we worked on over these past few years is this concept of the fusion model, which, really works towards that whole concept we talked about having the no wrong door, but also being a very recovery-oriented care. And one of the ways we did it was going to Disney and looking at, when we think about customer satisfaction and customer service, Disney has a massive playbook that they share with their staff, that their staff learns. But most of their big decisions all focus around these 4 keys of safety, courtesy, show, and efficiency, meaning that, if you go to Disney and you stand in the wrong place, you don't have somebody come up and yell at you or tell you you're in the, you have, no, or you can't do that. Their staff actually really focuses on on courtesy, and will say something like, "Hi, this is a reserved area. Would you like to go over here, or can I help you find another place that you would like to sit or stand?" And so they give you choice, and they treat you with respect and dignity. And they're also using all kinds of computers and beehive type monitoring of crowd levels to be able to try to create efficiencies and decrease waiting. But at the same time, even with all that courtesy, if you have too many drinks around the world in Epcot and try to climb up the pyramid in the Mexico area, and it's dangerous, they will come and get you down to be safe. But that's only at, if in dire situations. Everything else is focused on courtesy and having a great time and the efficiency aspects of it. So all of those things base around those 4 keys. And so likewise, we've been focusing on, what are our 4 keys? And we've come very similar, but they're slightly different. Ours is safety, being peer powered as a company, which means a lot of different things, but it's about those concepts that we've been talking about and how to fuse them into what we do. Instead of efficiency, we use the word of performance. And then 4th key instead of show is we just talk about being engaged. And so we're going to share a little bit about that. And we call that, we look at that as being kind of part of the RI way that we really feel like helps focus on that fusion. All these cool graphics. So in looking at that, you can see an element. This is actually one of the buildings where I'm a medical director in North Carolina in Durham. This is a 23-hour observation unit that we call the retreat. And it will be a place where people are coming in voluntarily or involuntarily. That's designed to be a warm, welcoming place that doesn't look like a hospital, but at the same time, it's safety. It meets all criteria for inpatient Joint Commission facility, but it's designed to be open with no plexiglass. Staff is totally able to get out and engage and be connected with people. It has cool paintings and murals on the wall. We try to get a lot of natural light in the rooms, but at the same time, you can see it's still got kind of the safety of furniture and some of those things too. And there's open lines of sight, no strangulation risks, and things of that nature in that setting. So it's designed to kind of have that engaged atmosphere, warm and more welcoming, clean and nice, and not to try to look like a hospital, but at the same time still have the safety functions to it. And then, so that's a close-up picture of our mural. One of our peer coaches in Washington State is an unbelievable artist, and we figured that out by looking at one of the paintings that she had done just to help out in the Washington State site. And they're so beautiful that our executive team, our CEO said, "Would you be willing to go around the company at all the places on the country and paint murals?" And so she goes and talks to guests that are at our place and staff and gets their input about what's meaningful in that area and what they think would look good on walls. And then she does these massive walls, and you really can't see it because I don't have it close enough, but it's tons of great recovery messages, almost like "Where's Waldo" written into lines in the water or lines on the trees. And you get to really, and I guess we'll sit there and stare and read out things at different times. Sometimes I know I love going to check it out and see the different things that I can find. But it creates that warm environment. And then at the same time, though, we've got performance with different dashboards that measure important things that we do. So when we looked at the Fusion model project, we did multiple groups, both big groups and small groups, and to come up with these 3 key things that we realized that we needed to make changes in to really work on improving our Fusion and pull us back in the middle of being able to do the things that we had to do to stay open as a crisis business, but do it in a recovery-oriented way. And I'll let Lisa talk about some of those if that's okay with you, Lisa.
So we, we've always felt that the peer role was really important, but in our recovery response centers, our actual sort of plan for how we work that is that the first person that a peer sees when they come in is a peer and a nurse. And so we want that peer supporter to be with them start to finish. And then they have leadership roles within the crisis center. So they're team leaders or shift coordinators, all the way from recovery coaches on up. And just our company in general, we always post that we prefer people in all of our roles who have lived experience. So they may not be coming from the peer perspective, but if we can hire someone who gets it because they've walked a similar path, we try to do that. The other thing is that, the peers are with them throughout their stay in every area of the crisis center, and they will be the last people that they see. And we have certain tools that we have developed. So is that coming next, the recovery vitals and stuff?
It is, yes. Okay. Yes.
So we've developed some new tools, and of course the language. Chuck and I were talking last night when we met briefly before this about a meeting that we had where sort of the way that the peers were talking and the clinical teams when we were first working on some things around these new tools, there was a disconnect, and so we really had to work through good communication and finding sort of a good middle ground for everyone to work within. And so some of the tools that we've developed that are part of this idea we call the RI way are like recovery vitals. And we came to that because we were thinking about how can we check in with people, not just in their, how's your blood pressure, how are you feeling in terms of your symptoms, but how are you as a person? And to do it in a way that really allows for us to be in touch with them. And so we want to check in with their level of hope, their belief in their ability to recover. And this is like in their worst moment to be asked about their belief in recovery. And if they say, I don't believe I can we help them to see that that's a possible thing using our lived experience of recovery as peer supporters? And then to look at their level of well-being rather than just what are your symptoms today. So we want to connect to those strong aspects of people that are always there, even in their worst moment. We have a strong center in us, and it's what gets us through every day. And we want to connect to those things as much as we want to connect to the physical aspects of their well-being, because those things are really important. What else would you say about that, Chuck? Because I know you use this every day.
About the recovery vitals, these, Lisa and some of the peer, go back to what we talked about on that show about peer role is peer leadership. Lisa and some of the peer leaders in our company helped develop this recovery vitals, and I'm so excited about us involving that with what we're doing. Because, when you're in a hospital setting, they do temperature and vital signs, and they do pain scales and all kinds of different scales to get data to help then guide improvement or lack of improvement. And it really helps you if you collect that data to be able to do that. So we feel like that this recovery vitals is going to change a lot of the way that we do things if we use it correctly. It's going to give us data. It's going to show the guests we're working with that we care about these things in their life. I hope to be able to study this and show that it improves by charting it and working it, that you can do quality improvement things that actually decreases people's time spent in crisis, in an acute crisis that requires a higher level of care. I'm really excited about it being a tool, and it is a subjective tool based on that person's feeling of it, but so is a pain scale. And so we're going to put it in a person's electronic medical record as a part of their scores. And like Lisa said, it generates a discussion point to say, if your level of hope is a 1 out of 4, where you feel no hope at all, that's somebody who might need, it's going to cause an intervention that this person's going to need some more support than somebody who already has really, really hopeful already. Just like a tough pain score might require an intervention in a facility. I'm going to go back to this language. We have always had strong language culture in our company, using terms like guest and our living room and retreat. And, I think, Jonathan, you had said something on the texting about non-compliance, not using words like that. So we've always had that, but we felt like we needed to crank it up another notch and give some of our providers and nursing staff who come, like I said, from that medical model, some new ways to help improve our language even further. So one of the things that we came up with that we realize is we frustrate sometimes our guests that we serve with bad customer service because we're not trying to be inconsistent, but you could sometimes go on the floor and ask 4 different people the same question. And they're usually really common questions like, when do I get out of here? When do I get to see the doctor? Or why can't I smoke? And they're really common ones. And people always gave different answers. And going back to Disney, if there's certain things, if you ask a staff member at Disney, they're going to give you a very consistent answer that's designed to be courteous, and really try to give the best answer you get. So we came up with the top 10 questions that we thought guests typically ask, and then our peer leadership council really had a big impact on helping us to shape and word trainings of how we can answer those things really consistently in a very honest, genuine way about the things that we're dealing with. We're working on implementing this training actually as we speak, which is the Do With clinical guides. And it's taking a guy like me, a numbnut psychiatrist who was trained one way, and teaching me, if I have to do X, Y, and Z as part of a psychiatric evaluation, how can I do it with someone better? What are ways that we could do it with someone? And then the final piece of our language was, and I remember you telling me this quote, Lisa, was how sometimes having to repeat your story multiple times to different people throughout the process of being evaluated, and somebody used the word hurting in the comments, and it's so true. Sometimes that process, and it's traumatizing to have to repeat your story over and over again. So we make a real big emphasis on, if peer first, the information that they get is going to go into the medical record for the clinician who's doing a clinical assessment. And then the licensed clinical person, that information that they get and the information the nurse gets is going to go into the psychiatric eval. And we're requiring everyone to work on reading that first, then talking to the person, and being able to, if you need some extra elaboration on certain things, asking them questions about that, but letting them know that they didn't waste their time and that they don't have to go through and repeat everything over again. And the other benefit of that is it's very efficient, and it lets us, when we get through seeing someone, be done with their note and have that piece of it finished. It also really increases teamwork, because now if there's something that the clinician wrote and I'm doing the psychiatric eval and I see something different, I can go back and say, hey, here's what I saw and it's what you wrote. Can we talk about that? And it really creates a lot of crosstalk that's helpful. And then, Lisa, could you talk about the engagement scale? So this is the other piece. We talked about engaged being one of our 4 keys, and we wanted a way to measure it.
Mm-hmm. So we want to actually involve each person that comes to us in the peer leadership team. Council was really involved in this, and we wanted a way that wouldn't feel like pressure on someone to say everything was fine. We wanted it to really be kept away from any staff in the crisis center, in the recovery response center at all, that none of them would see this, but that the peers would do this, specifically the peer team lead. And they would ask specifically the questions that the person could respond to, and they are: I'm a partner in my care. I am supported in connecting with my, sorry, I have to move my chat box so I can see what the end of that says. With my community, I feel cared for by the staff. So we wanted this to be done by peers, seen by the peers, and to really help us to, if we're talking about quality and satisfaction, we have to do it in a way where the individuals that we're serving can be fully honest with us. So that person, the team leader who works with them, has that role that they keep that information from that person sacred, basically, and quiet, and then use that information to help make changes within the work of the team. Did I explain that well?
You did perfectly, Lisa. So, and the whole goal, we measure all kinds of things every day for performance from our staff in terms of like how quickly law enforcement or local support can drop somebody off and get out of there. Then we keep percentages of how often we have to send somebody up to a higher level of inpatient care, because we're really trying to keep that to a bare minimum number. And so this was thought the same way as we thought it also was more effective than just a end of the stay customer service scale, because it really is tracking every shift. How does that person feel? Like each individual shift will have their own kind of collection of scores to help gauge folks that are how that interaction is going. And we really believe that if somebody feels cared for, this is just my opinion. I think we're going to try to do some research on how these scales come out and what they do and what the response of them means. But I think feeling cared for is a huge part of a recovery and what we can do in a crisis situation to help people. So I'm really excited about us layering into this and being able to use this data to help drive the spirit on a daily basis with our crisis work, because crisis work is hard. It's repetitive, and sometimes you see people 4 or 5 different times in a year. And on their bad day, they may not treat you great all the time. But so having scales like this to help reinforce our mission of what we're doing is great. And this is all developed from the leadership of our peer leadership council and peers on the unit and peers on the direct line that helped work together to develop these different concepts and techniques. So just very, very happy. And the last thing we talk about with engagement is that in crisis work, it may be the first time that somebody has an exposure to start working on their recovery path, or they may have been on their recovery path and are just need to get back on it, and they're in a crisis at that moment. And so we really also talk about in our crisis sites being engaged in your community and engaged to other campuses of connection of things that are working in the community for recovery supports, and knowing what those resources are so that you can help support and connect people to those. We do a lot of different services besides just the crisis part, but a big part of what we feel like is really important is not just being engaged with our guests, but being engaged in our communities. Some other things just that sometimes at this talk I mentioned is, we use some best practices like zero suicide principles in healthcare, which is designed to try to create a really collaborative working together with the person on what they're dealing with suicidal thoughts, and involves a lot of different parameters. And we're in year 2 of implementing the full concepts of that on our crisis units. And then likewise in the treatment of opiate use disorder, our recovery focus and use of peers is being huge in helping connect people from emergency rooms that are having troubles with opiate use disorder to come to our unit instead, and be able to offer evidence-based practices in a recovery-oriented way with MAT, and then using peer bridgers after they leave our site to get connected to other layers of care. So those are just some things I was going to share with you about that. And a lot of times we have a movie, but I don't think it's going to play and that you'd be able to hear the volume of it. So, and we are down to just a few more minutes. I would love to leave room for questions. Lisa, do you have some other thoughts or comments you'd like to share?
No, I can just, I can say to you guys that having been a person who had the experience of using services for many years, that I'm really proud of where I work and our commitment and our really working hard to find out how to do this work as good as it can be done, and including peers in everything that we do. It's really phenomenal, and I love this new work that we're doing around the recovery vitals and getting people's honest feedback so that we can use it to learn from, to keep growing our skills around how to do this the best it can be done. I mean, there's technical skills of how you can do it, but if we want to do it in a human-centered way, a recovery-focused way that understands how people feel when they come to a place like a crisis center and make it as good as it can be, we're doing some things that are really wonderful and innovative, and I'm really proud of it.
Thanks, Lisa. I would say, the other piece to this is to be very open, is that we're on this journey, and we're not at the end game of where we want to be. This is, we are just now implementing the recovery vitals into our electronic medical record and developing we actually want to roll out the engagement scale with the research at the same time, so that we can start tracking the data and looking at impacts from the get-go. So these are things that we are just are developed and that we're implementing into what we do. And so we really hope to be able to present and show what the impact of it is. And I'm sure we'll figure out lots of different things that work and don't work. But the general principle of my call to action to everyone is to just think about how we can all work together and communicate to be able to, because this really would be your ultimate end goal, is if you had a place, if you had the ability, at least in crisis care across the country, that was kind of standardized, that when people needed care, they could get it, but that it was done in a recovery-oriented fashion that fit the level of what they needed and what they wanted, and helped them stay safe, but really help them, there's less about doing something to them and processing people, and more about helping them, on their recovery path. So, and it's not easy to do, to pull all these things together, but that's kind of what we like to talk about and spread that mission statement of, please think about ways you can do that in your communities. I'm going to go to the chat area, see if there's any questions.
I have a question based on my own experience here in Los Angeles, which is I know that the idea of welcoming everyone is really challenging, and it's something that we work hard at trying to do. And I'm just wondering, I mean, I know the reactions that we often face from our partners in the community is one where they're really questioning what we're doing, like the sheriff's department, for example. I mean, what we try to do is when they think that what we're doing is crazy, we say, well, we know you're dealing with some difficult folks, bring them over to us and we'll work with them, so that instead of seeing us as a problem, they see us as a partner, and they see that we're up against some of the same issues as they are and that we're working together on this. I'm just wondering, what strategies you used as you rolled this out in various communities to try to help people see that this is part of the solution?
Yeah.
Lisa, do you want? You know me, I can talk for days.
Go ahead, Chuck.
Well, at least with law enforcement, Libby, a couple of things. Number one is we really try to get out in the community and participate and get to know law enforcement. And our number one thing for them is that we do not say no to police. So if a police drop by somebody that's really medically unstable, we're not going to say, no, you can't leave them here, they're medically unstable. We have nursing staff and we have providers there. And so our goal is, we will take that person out of the police car and we'll support them in their next step of whether we need to transport them to the emergency room for a particular medical issue, or if we need to call 911, we'll do it. But we don't want them to be in the back of a police car if they need support with that. So we never say no. We always find ways to say yes. And in fact, our saying is, thank you, sir, may I have another? Because it's just, because as soon as you say no one time, the officers won't bring people back. And that means that they're likely going to be potentially going to jail or emergency room if they don't have option for that. And I really look forward to a time, again, per Crisis Now, that law enforcement is not the in-between step, that we have true mobile support crisis teams that have support and peer support built into that. And we're seeing models like that around the country. And we're seeing hybrid models where peer support or licensed clinical workers are out with CIT trained law enforcement. So there's all kinds of ways that that's being done now. But so we think about that if we can help make it really easy so that the law enforcement doesn't have to think and they can just come drop somebody off and they know that they're good and they're in and out in 5 minutes. That it doesn't take too long if you can consistently do that for the law enforcement to become big fans of you in the community.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, what I've seen is that law enforcement really wants better outcomes for people, and they're just really confused about how to work with some people, and they're just thrilled if they know they can take somewhere where issues are going to be addressed, because often it's like there's people who fall through the cracks and they're really not appropriate for law enforcement. They're really not appropriate for the ER. They're really not appropriate for a psych hospital. And our system just hasn't had solutions as to how to catch people falling through those cracks. And like law enforcement tend to be the ones where they've got somebody in their cell at the station who really, they know they shouldn't be there, but they don't have any other solution. That's all they got. So
yeah.
I think it's really exciting what you're working on and really challenging, and I applaud your courage and compassion in doing this difficult work. I know how hard it is.
Melissa wrote that they have a teaming as part of their CIT training where they have the law enforcement actually comes to the living room in Tennessee, and they have lunch with guests who want to participate and staff and have the opportunity to talk about those things. So that's really cool. And then Helena is talking about what I just mentioned, these mobile support crisis teams that involve peer support and counselors that correspond along with law enforcement.
I mean, I think that one of the things about law enforcement is they tend to see people when they're at the worst moment in their life. So they don't necessarily believe in recovery because they haven't seen it. So I think it's really powerful when peers go back and talk to law enforcement and say, yeah, you know what, 3 years ago you arrested me and this is how it was. And today I'm working, today I have a family, you know, you were part of the solution. I think that helps police see that the intervention that they provide can interrupt that suicidal thought, can stop the action that can really lead to something damaging, and that there's a trajectory that goes on that can move upwards. It's not necessarily down. So that's, law enforcement needs hope too.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're just about out of time. Go ahead, Dr. Browning, if you just want to add anything else.
I was just going to say what you were saying reminded me of things that Lisa touched on, but I like using this word to think about it, and it's why peer power is so important in my mind, is how important people's identity is. And you talked about like the police and how they see that person and how that person then gets that identity put onto them from the perceptions of their family or things when they're in a crisis or having a tough day, and how I think more than anything else that I've learned that really means something to me is how to work towards making sure that we don't negatively hurt people's identity, and we help support in a warm environment to let people get in touch with the identity that and how they see themselves as not just illness. And that's something that is so important. But that word and thinking about how you do that.
I can't tell you how many people I know in California who have 5150 tattooed on them. That's our code for being put on a forced hold. And people, it becomes a badge, or it becomes something you wear for the rest of your life once you've been put on a hold. So I really appreciate that perspective from you. So I just want to thank everybody for participating. I'm posting a link to evaluation surveys in the chat. I hope you'll take a chance to fill those out. The next session in this room is what we're calling Next Steps, Final Words and Next Steps in 15 minutes. We're inviting everyone from the whole conference to gather here and to talk about how we can continue this important work. This has been a very successful conference with hundreds of people participating. I know it's something that we need to hear from one another, and so I do hope that you'll join us there and just share your thoughts on what you think we should do next. So thank you so much, Lisa St. George and Dr. Chuck Browning. We really appreciate your thoughts. Very exciting. This session will be recorded and made available online, and the materials distributed, so please stay tuned for that. You'll be getting an email about it hopefully very soon. So thanks again for being with us, and I encourage you to stretch your legs, get a glass of water, take a little break, and we'll come back in about 15 minutes right here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.